One day, they were legends. The next, they were gone. Do you remember where you were when the world suddenly stopped? When the internet went silent, and millions of people couldn't believe the headlines? Because these weren't just celebrities. They were history. They were icons. They were family to us. Today, we're counting down 15 black actor deaths that shocked Hollywood. The heartbreaking losses that no one saw coming. So stay with us until the end. And if any of these stories move you, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which death shocked you the most. Chadwick Boseman. August 28, 2020 didn't feel real. The world refreshed its screens over and over again, hoping the headline would change. It didn't. Chadwick Boseman was gone. 43 years old. No warning. No goodbye tour. Just silence where a king once stood. But the truth makes it even heavier. While we were cheering in packed theaters, watching Wakanda Rise, watching T'Challa Stand Tall in Black Panther, Infinity War Endgame, Chadwick was fighting a war of his own. Stage 3, then Stage 4 colon cancer. Surgeries, chemotherapy, pain most of us can't imagine. And yet, on screen, he never let us see it. Not once. His posture was still regal, his voice steady, his presence powerful. He carried the weight of a cultural revolution on his shoulders, while his own body was quietly breaking down. Black Panther wasn't just a movie. It was a moment. Kids walked into theaters and saw themselves as royalty, as heroes, as the center of the universe. Parents cried in the dark because, for the first time, Hollywood felt like it was speaking directly to them. And at the center of that storm stood Chadwick, calm, dignified, intentional. What no one knew was that every premiere, every press tour, every fight scene required strength far beyond acting. He wasn't just portraying a superhero. He was being one. When his family posted that final message, the world froze. The tweet became one of the most liked in history. Co-stars were stunned. Directors blindsided. Fans shattered. Because the man who gave us hope had been carrying his own suffering in silence. The heartbreak wasn't just that he died. It was how he lived. He chose purpose over pity, legacy over sympathy, work over worry. He gave everything, every ounce of energy, to make sure the stories mattered. And maybe that's the message he left us with. You don't always know what someone is fighting, but you can choose to fight for something bigger than yourself. Chadwick Boseman didn't just play a king. He left this world as one. Paul Robeson. Long before Hollywood ever made space for black greatness, there was a man who was too powerful to fit inside the box America built for him. Paul Robeson wasn't just an actor. Calling him that almost feels disrespectful because he was everything. An athlete, a scholar, a singer with voice so deep it sounded like history itself, a lawyer, an activist, a force. In the 1930s, when black men were rarely allowed dignity on screen, Robeson stood in the spotlight anyway. He starred in films like The Emperor Jones, breaking barriers that weren't supposed to break. On Broadway, his performance as Othello ran for nearly 300 shows, unheard of at the time. He wasn't playing stereotypes. He was playing humanity, and the world couldn't ignore him. For a moment, it seemed like he had done the impossible. But greatness has a cost, especially when you refuse to stay silent. Robeson didn't just entertain. He spoke loudly, fearlessly, about racism, about inequality, about injustice. And in Cold War America, that made him dangerous. Not because he was wrong, but because he was unafraid. The government watched him. The FBI built files on him. His passport was taken away for 8 years, cutting him off from the international stages that adored him. Hollywood blacklisted him. The same country that applauded his talent began erasing his name. Imagine that, one of the most celebrated performers on earth, reduced to a ghost in his own homeland. The pressure crushed him slowly. Depression, illness, isolation. A man who once filled concert halls now lived in the shadow of persecution. And by the time Paul Robeson died in 1976, many young people didn't even know who he was. That's what makes his death feel so haunting. Not just because we lost him, but because America tried to forget him. Yet his legacy survived anyway. Because every black actor who walked onto a set with pride, every role played with dignity, every barrier shattered after him, was built on ground Paul Robeson bled for. His story is a reminder. Sometimes the most shocking deaths aren't the ones that come suddenly, but the ones where the world let a legend fade while he was still alive. Paul Robeson wasn't just ahead of his time. He was too big for it. Nipsey Hussle, March 31st, 2019 felt like a nightmare the city couldn't wake up from. The news spread fast, too fast. Nipsey Hussle had been shot, not in some distant place, not in a private mansion behind gates, but right there in the neighborhood that raised him, outside his own store, outside Marathon Clothing, the same corner where he once stood as a kid dreaming of escape. He stood again as a man who came back to rebuild, and that's what made it unbearable. Because Nipsey wasn't supposed to be another tragedy. He was the blueprint. He was a long game. He wasn't just a rapper. He was becoming something bigger. Hollywood was watching him closely. Film projects were forming. Documentaries were in motion. His story was turning into something cinematic, something generational. And through his relationship with actress Lauren London, his presence in the entertainment world only grew deeper. But Nipsey's real role wasn't just on stages or screens. It was in the streets. He poured money back into Crenshaw. He opened businesses where others only saw brokenness. He created jobs where hope was scarce. He sat down with police, tried to reduce gang violence, trying to stop the cycle before it swallowed another generation. He could have left. He had every reason to leave, but he stayed. And that's what makes his death hit like a punch to the soul. In broad daylight. On a Sunday afternoon, a man who was trying to heal his community was killed by someone from that same community. The irony is almost too cruel to speak out loud. A father, a partner, a leader, gone at 33. The streets filled with candles. Murals appeared overnight. Fans cried like they'd lost a brother. Because they didn't just mourn Nipsey. They mourned what he represented. A future where success wasn't about escaping the hood, but about saving it. His death wasn't just shocking because it was violent. It was shocking because it was preventable. And it left behind a question that still echoes. How do you survive the place you love most? Nipsey Hussle didn't die chasing fame. He died standing in purpose. And that might be the most heartbreaking kind of legend. Sidney Poitier, January 6, 2022. The headline didn't scream tragedy. It whispered history. Sidney Poitier had died at 94. And somehow, even at 94, it felt impossible. Because Sidney wasn't just a man. He was an era. Before him, black actors were handed roles that shrank them. Servants, sidekicks, shadows. Hollywood had decided what black dignity looked like. And it wasn't leading man material. Then Sidney Poitier walked into the room. Calm, measured, unapologetically intelligent. And everything shifted. In 1964, when he won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Lilies of the Field, it wasn't just applause filling the theater. It was a door cracking open. The first black man to win that award. Let that sink in. Decades of cinema, and he was the first. But Sidney understood something powerful. He wasn't just choosing roles. He was choosing representation. And in the heat of the night, when he said, "They call me Mr. Tibbs," it wasn't just dialogue. It was defiance. In Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, he stood at the center of a conversation America was afraid to have. Interracial love, at a time when it was still illegal in parts of the country. In A Raisin in the Sun, he brought the black family's struggle and ambition to the mainstream screen without apology. He never played beneath his worth. He carried himself with such precision, such grace, that Hollywood had no choice but to adjust its lens. But that kind of pressure is heavy. He knew every performance reflected more than just a character. It reflected millions of people who rarely saw themselves portrayed with intelligence and honor. He had to be twice as good, twice as composed, twice as perfect. And he did it. When he passed, the grief wasn't chaotic. It was reverent. Because with Sidney's death, it felt like we lost a foundation. The quiet giant who made it possible for generations after him, Denzel Will Chadwick, to stand tall without asking permission. His life wasn't shocking because it ended. It was shocking because he endured long enough to see the industry he fought transform before his eyes. Sidney Poitier didn't just break barriers. He walked through them and held the door open. Michael Clarke Duncan, September 3rd, 2012. The world lost a giant. And not just because Michael Clarke Duncan stood 6'5" with shoulders that filled a doorway. He was a giant in spirit, a man whose presence could shake a room, and whose kindness could soften it just as quickly. When news broke that he had died at 54 after complications from a heart attack, Hollywood went quiet. It didn't feel right. Not yet. Not him. Michael wasn't born into fame. He didn't grow up surrounded by agents and auditions. He worked security, dug ditches, loaded trucks, and eventually became a bodyguard for celebrities. Will Smith, Jamie Foxx, Notorious B.I.G. He stood behind the stars, watching, learning, waiting. And somewhere in that waiting, he made a decision. He didn't want to guard the spotlight. He wanted to step into it. Then came the Green Mile. John Coffey, a death row inmate with supernatural healing powers and the heart of a child. A man built like a mountain but carrying unbearable innocence. When Michael delivered the line, "I'm tired, boss," something cracked inside audiences everywhere. It wasn't acting. It was soul. He earned an Oscar nomination. The industry finally saw what it had always known about himself. He belonged there. But even after that breakthrough, the leading roles never fully came. He worked. He stayed visible. But somehow, Hollywood never gave him the full runway his talent deserved. And then his heart gave out. Suddenly, friends said he was laughing days before. Planning, living, loving. His fiancée had performed CPR when she found him unresponsive, buying him time. But after nearly 2 months in the hospital, the fight ended. What made his death hit differently wasn't just the age. It was the symbolism. Heart disease remains one of the leading killers of black men in America. And here was a man whose physical size had helped define his career, possibly contributing to the strain that took him away. The gentle giant. That's what everyone called him. Tom Hanks said he was a gift. And maybe that's the tragedy. Sometimes the strongest-looking people are carrying invisible weight. Michael Clarke Duncan proved that power doesn't have to roar. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes it leaves far too soon. Bernie Mac. August 9, 2008. The laughter stopped. And for a man like Bernie Mac, that felt almost impossible. He was only 50. 50, an age where most careers are just hitting their stride. And Bernie? He was on fire. Stand-up legend. Sitcom star. Scene stealer in blockbuster films. He had clawed his way from Chicago's West Side comedy clubs to the biggest stages in America, and he did it the hard way. No shortcuts. No overnight success. For years, he grinded in smoky rooms where the crowd could turn on you in seconds. That's where Bernie was forged. Raw, fearless, honest. When he stepped onto the stage at Def Comedy Jam and opened with, "I ain't scared of you," it wasn't just a punchline, it was a declaration. Hollywood finally had to pay attention. Then came the Bernie Mac Show, a sitcom that felt different, real. He played a version of himself raising his sister's kids, breaking the fourth wall, talking directly to the camera like we were sitting at the kitchen table with him. Beneath the sharp humor was something deeper: love, responsibility, family. It won awards. It built loyalty. It made him a household name. Then the movies rolled in. Ocean's 11, Friday, Transformers. Bernie could hold his own next to the biggest stars in the world. He had timing you couldn't teach, a rhythm that felt like music. But behind the scenes, his body was fighting something else. Sarcoidosis, an inflammatory disease affecting his lungs. He kept it mostly private, kept working, kept smiling. That was Bernie. Pushed through it. In 2008, he developed pneumonia. And because his immune system was already compromised, his body couldn't fight back. For weeks, fans waited for updates from a hospital. Prayers flooded in. Hope held strong. And then he was gone. The shock wasn't just his age. It was the injustice of it. A man who brought so much joy, taken by something invisible, something silent, something most people didn't even know he was battling. When comedians spoke after his death, their voices cracked. Because Bernie wasn't just funny. He was a leader, a bridge between generations, a black comedy, a man who proved you could be raw without being reckless, honest without losing heart. His death left a void that still echoes in comedy clubs today. Because laughter feels different when you remember how fragile it is. Bernie Mac taught us that humor is survival, and maybe that's why losing him hurts so much. The man who said he wasn't scared left us wishing we'd had more time to laugh with him. Whitney Houston, February 11th, 2012, the night before the Grammys. The Beverly Hilton Hotel was buzzing, industry executives setting up parties, artists rehearsing, cameras flashing in anticipation of music's biggest night. And upstairs, in a quiet hotel room, Whitney Houston was alone, 48 years old. When the news broke that she had been found unresponsive in a bathtub, the shock hit like an earthquake. Yes, the world knew she had struggled. Yes, addiction had followed her for years. But somewhere deep down, people believed Whitney would survive it, because Whitney wasn't supposed to end in tragedy. She was supposed to rise again. Her voice had once felt supernatural, effortless. When she sang, "I Will Always Love You," it wasn't just a performance. It was an emotional detonation. That single note could stop time. And when she stepped into Hollywood with The Bodyguard, she didn't just act. She became an icon. The film grossed over $400 million. The soundtrack became one of the best-selling albums of all time. She proved she could command both the stage and the screen. She followed it with Waiting to Exhale, The Preacher's Wife. She had range, presence, star power that filled the room before she even spoke. But fame has a way of amplifying pain. Her marriage to Bobby Brown played out in public like a slow-motion storm. The tabloids fed on it. The interviews grew harder to watch. The once crystal-clear voice began to show cracks. And the world watched, helpless, fascinated, judgmental, hopeful, all at once. Addiction doesn't care about talent. It doesn't care about wealth. It doesn't care that millions adore you. The coroner ruled her death an accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use as contributing factors. The next night, the Grammy Awards went on, but the ceremony transformed into a memorial. Artists cried through tributes. The celebration became mourning. What made Whitney's death so devastating wasn't just the loss of a superstar. It was the loss of potential redemption. People wanted her comeback. They wanted the story where she beat her demons and reclaimed her throne. Instead, they got a cautionary tale. But here's the truth beneath the tragedy. Whitney Houston gave the world a voice it will never forget. And sometimes, the most powerful voices leave us with the quietest endings. Her story reminds us that behind the spotlight, there's a human being, fragile, struggling, imperfect. Whitney didn't just sing about love. She left us learning how deeply we can feel it, even in loss. Cicely Tyson, January 28th, 2021, 96 years old. By any measure, Cicely Tyson lived a full life, a legendary life, the kind of life people celebrate, not mourn with shock. And yet, when she died, Hollywood still gasped, because Cicely didn't feel mortal. Just 2 days before her passing, she had released her memoir. She was doing interviews, speaking with clarity, laughing with the strength of someone timeless. She seemed eternal. And then, suddenly, she was gone. Cicely Tyson wasn't just an actress. She was a standard for over 7 decades. She carried herself with an integrity that was almost revolutionary. In an era when black women were offered roles as maids, caricatures, stereotypes, Cicely said no. She refused. She would rather disappear from the screen than degrade her people on it. That kind of choice cost her work, cost her money, cost her opportunities. But it earned her something far greater: respect. Her performances weren't entertainment. They were testimony. In Sounder, she earned an Academy Award nomination in 1972, becoming one of the first black women ever recognized in that category. She portrayed women of strength: Harriet Tubman's mother, Coretta Scott King, survivors, fighters, queens in plain clothes. And then came the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, a role so powerful, so transformative, people believed Miss Jane was real. Cicely aged decades on screen, carrying the pain of slavery, the endurance of survival, and the witness of the civil rights era, all in one body, one voice. She wasn't acting. She was embodying history. Awards followed, Emmys, a Tony, an honorary Oscar, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. But none of it felt like trophies. It felt like overdue acknowledgement. When she passed, tributes poured in immediately. Oprah, Viola Davis, Tyler Perry, generations of black actresses speaking her name like a prayer. Because Cicely wasn't just a star. She was a foundation. Her death shocked people not because she lived too short, but because even at 96, we weren't ready to imagine a world without her. Cicely Tyson proved that representation isn't just about being seen. It's about being seen with dignity. And her legacy whispers a truth Hollywood can never forget. Some people don't just break barriers. They become the blueprint. Heavy D, November 8th, 2011. 2 weeks earlier, he was on stage, smiling, moving, breathing life into the crowd at the BET Hip Hop Awards. The energy was right. The comeback felt real. Heavy D looked healthy, happy, back in rhythm. Then suddenly, he wasn't. At just 44 years old, Dwight Arrington Myers, known to the world as Heavy D, collapsed outside his Los Angeles home after complaining he couldn't breathe. By the time paramedics rushed him to Cedars-Sinai, it was too late. A pulmonary embolism, a blood clot in his lung, heart disease, complications tied to weight and strain. It felt unreal. Because Heavy D wasn't the tragic figure of hip-hop. He wasn't controversial. He wasn't reckless. He was the joy, the positivity, the smooth operator in an era when rap was getting harder and darker. In the late 80s and early 90s, Heavy D and the boys brought balance to the genre. Danceable hits, charisma, confidence without menace. He was one of the first rappers to successfully cross into television and film. A different world. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Boston Public. He had the kind of presence that made casting directors take notice. Big frame, bigger personality. He felt indestructible. But health doesn't care about image. Behind the scenes, his body was struggling. Deep vein thrombosis likely caused a clot that ended his life. The lifestyle, travel, stress, inconsistent health care may have played a role. And like too many men, especially black men, he may not have fully known the danger he was in. That's what makes his death hit so hard. He had just performed, just laughed, just lived. There was no dramatic decline, no long hospital vigil, just a sudden stop. The hip-hop world mourned not just a pioneer, but a good man, someone who made the room lighter when he walked in, someone who helped build a bridge between music and screen without losing himself. Heavy D represented the fun side of success, and his death was a reminder that even joy is weight. He taught us how to move with confidence, and his loss taught us how fragile that movement really is. Sherman Hemsley, July 24th, 2012. Sherman Hemsley was found dead in his home in El Paso, Texas, 74 years old. But the shock wasn't just that he died, it was how, because to millions of people, Sherman wasn't just an actor. He was George Jefferson. Loud, proud, unforgettable. That strut, that voice, those razor-sharp one-liners. The Jeffersons wasn't just a sitcom. It was cultural history. For 11 seasons, Sherman played a black businessman who was unapologetically ambitious, brash, funny, complicated. In the 70s and 80s, that kind of character mattered. The show tackled race, class, success, and identity in ways television had never dared before. George Jefferson wasn't perfect, but he was real, and Sherman made him iconic. So when news broke that he had died alone, people couldn't process it. How does someone that larger than life vanish quietly? But the story didn't end there. It got stranger, darker. After his death, Sherman's body wasn't buried for months. Months. A legal battle erupted over his estate. A man claiming to be his half-brother demanded a DNA test before burial, hoping to secure inheritance rights. Others argued about whether Sherman wanted to be cremated or buried. While lawyers fought, his body sat in refrigeration for 4 long months. An icon reduced to paperwork. A legend trapped in limbo. It felt undignified, almost cruel. The man who made America laugh for decades couldn't even be laid to rest in peace. And then came another shock. Sherman had died with very little money. Despite years of fame, despite playing one of television's most successful businessmen, he had struggled financially in real life. He hadn't worked much in recent years. Fame didn't protect him. Success didn't guarantee security. When he was finally buried in November 2012, the ceremony was small, quiet, nothing like the farewell a cultural giant deserved. And that's what makes Sherman Hemsley's death linger. Not just because George Jefferson was gone, but because it revealed something unsettling. Hollywood can make you immortal on screen and still let you disappear off it. Sherman gave the world laughter, representation, history. Yet in the end, his passing was marked by loneliness, confusion, and silence. A reminder that behind every TV legend is a human being. And even icons deserve dignity when the cameras stop rolling. John Singleton, April 29, 2019. The news hit Black Hollywood like a thunderclap. John Singleton was gone, only 51 years old. And the grief felt deeper than losing a filmmaker, because John wasn't just a director. He was a storyteller who changed the lens forever. Before John Singleton, Hollywood didn't know how to tell Black life with honesty, not without distortion, not without stereotypes, not without turning real communities into background noise. Then a 24-year-old kid from South Central Los Angeles picked up a camera, and everything changed. Boys in the Hood wasn't just a movie. It was a mirror. It showed young Black men not as criminals or cliches, but as sons, brothers, dreamers, survivors. It introduced the world to Ice Cube's acting power. It revealed Cuba Gooding Jr.'s depth. It gave audiences a story Hollywood had avoided for decades. And John became the first Black director ever nominated for Best Director at the Oscars. At 24, that kind of brilliance felt unstoppable. After that, he kept going. Poetic Justice, Higher Learning, Rosewood, Baby Boy. Films that weren't always comfortable, but were always real. He wasn't interested in making Hollywood feel safe. He wanted it to feel true. John wasn't just creating movies. He was creating space. Space for Black actors to lead. Space for Black stories to matter. Space for future directors to believe they belong behind the camera. He mentored young filmmakers. He pushed studios for diversity. He fought to make sure Black cinema wasn't a trend, but a foundation. And then, suddenly it all stopped. He returned from a trip to Costa Rica and suffered a massive stroke. At first, there was hope. His family believed he might recover. For nearly 2 weeks, he lay in a coma, the world waiting for a miracle. But miracles didn't come. His family made the heartbreaking decision to take him off life support. When he died, tributes poured in from everywhere. Actors, directors, studios, artists who owed their careers to the doors John opened. Because his death wasn't just sad. It was shocking. He was still working, still creating, still building. He had stories left to tell. A project about the 1992 Los Angeles uprising was in motion. His voice was still needed. John Singleton's passing left a hole that can't be filled. Because he wasn't just a man who made movies. He was a man who made history visible. His legacy lives in every filmmaker who dares to tell the truth. And his death reminds us, the people who change the world don't always get enough time in it, but the stories they leave behind outlive them. Natina Reed, October 26, 2012, 2 days before her 33rd birthday. Natina Reed stepped into the street in Atlanta and never made it to the other side. It wasn't scandal. It wasn't violence. It wasn't addiction. It was a car accident. And somehow, that randomness made it hurt even more. If you grew up in the late 90s, you remember Black. 808, Bring It All to Me. The confidence, the harmony, the sparkle of a group that felt like it was just getting started. Natina wasn't just a member. She was edge, attitude, the spark that gave the trio its bite. Hollywood noticed too. In Bring It On, she played one of the Clovers, part of the cheer squad whose talent had been stolen and repackaged. That role may have seemed small, but it resonated. It was layered with irony, A story about recognition, about Black talent finally being acknowledged. Natina carried that energy naturally. She had the look, the voice, the presence. But like so many young artists, the industry shifted. Black disbanded. Personal struggles followed. The spotlight dimmed. And then something hopeful started happening. She was working on a comeback, recording again, performing, reconnecting with fans who still remembered. Friends said she was in a better place. Focused, excited, ready to remind people who she was. That's what makes her death feel suspended in time. She wasn't fading. She was rebuilding. The driver who hit her stayed at the scene. No alcohol. No charges. Just a tragic accident in the dark of night. A split-second misalignment of fate. Her young son lost his mother instantly. The industry lost a talent that never fully got to show its second act. And then there was the painful irony. Lisa Left Eye Lopez, who had helped Men Are Black through TLC's production company, had also died in a car accident years earlier. The symmetry felt cruel, as if history had repeated itself in the most heartbreaking way. Natina's funeral was filled with artists, friends, family from Atlanta's music scene. Grief layered with disbelief. Because sometimes the most shocking deaths aren't dramatic. They're ordinary. One step, one moment, one crossing of a street. Natina Reed reminds us how fragile a comeback can be, how quickly momentum can vanish, and how life doesn't always wait for you to finish your second chapter. Robin Harris. March 18, 1990. Robin Harris went to sleep and never woke up, 36 years old. That's not the age of a legend's ending. That's the age of a beginning. If you weren't around in the late 80s, you might not fully grasp who Robin Harris was becoming. But in comedy circles, especially in Los Angeles, he was that guy, the host of the Comedy Act Theater, the proving ground for Black comedians. If you want to be somebody, you went through Robin. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't polished for mainstream comfort. He was sharp, observational, brutally funny in a way that felt like family teasing at a cookout. He could take something as simple as going to the swap meet or dealing with misbehaving kids and turn it into a cultural moment. And then there was BBS Kids, a routine so vivid, so animated in delivery, audiences could see the chaos unfolding in their minds. It would later become a feature-length animated film, but Robin never got to witness that legacy unfold. That's the tragedy. He was right there. He had just filmed House Party, just appeared in Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, just rap Mo Better Blues. The momentum was undeniable. Studios were watching. Doors were cracking open. And then overnight, a heart attack closed them all. He had performed the night before, doing what he loved, making people laugh. There were no warning signs loud enough to stop it. The comedy community was stunned, because Robin wasn't just talented. He was next. You could feel it. House Party became a hit after his death. His performance as the strict father trying to keep his son from sneaking out to a party became one of the film's highlights. Audiences laughed, not realizing they were watching someone who would never see the applause. That's what makes his story linger. He worked for years in small clubs, grinding, sharpening, earning every inch of success. He was finally about to taste the mainstream spotlight he deserved. And life said no. Robin Harris reminds us that timing is cruel, that sometimes you can do everything right, put in the work, wait your turn, build your craft, and still not get the full reward. But here's the part that matters. Even in 36 short years, he left an imprint strong enough to echo decades later. Sometimes greatness doesn't need longevity. It just needs impact. And Robin Harris had that in abundance. Meshock Taylor, June 28, 2014. Meshock Taylor died quietly at home in Los Angeles, 67 years old. Not unusually young, not headline-shattering on paper. And yet, when the news broke, fans felt something sink deep in their chest. Because Meshock was one of those actors who felt like he'd always been there. In the 80s and 90s, he was everywhere. Television screens, sitcoms, guest roles, voice work. A steady presence. The kind of performer who didn't chase superstardom, but became unforgettable anyway. Most people knew him as Anthony Bouvier on Designing Women, and that role mattered. Anthony wasn't a stereotype. He wasn't a punchline. He was smart, capable, dignified. A black man navigating race and class in the South with humor and depth. Meshack gave him warmth, charm, and humanity, making him one of the most groundbreaking characters on the show. He was proof that representation didn't always need to shout. Sometimes it simply needed to exist, fully formed. Meshack also showed his range in films like Mannequin, where he stole scenes with both physical comedy and fearless energy. He could be subtle. He could be outrageous. He could do it all. He was the definition of a working actor, always employed, always delivering, always professional. But what shocked people most wasn't just that he died. It was learning how he died. Colorectal cancer. And almost no one knew he was sick. In an era where celebrity illnesses become public narratives, press releases, social media updates, fan prayers, Meshack chose something different. Privacy. He didn't want the spotlight on his suffering. He wanted peace. He fought his battle away from cameras, surrounded only by family. No public countdown. No farewell interviews. Just quiet strength. When he passed, his family released a simple statement. And that was it. No spectacle. Just absence. And maybe that's why it hit so hard. Because Meshack Taylor represented so many performers who build Hollywood from the middle. Not always celebrated as icons, but essential to the stories we grew up with. His death was a reminder. Some people shape your life without you realizing it. They make you laugh. They make you feel seen. And then one day, they're gone. Meshack Taylor didn't demand attention. He earned it, and his quiet exit left behind a silence louder than most headlines. Chris Lighty, August 30th, 2012. Chris Lighty was found dead in his Bronx apartment from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. 44 years old. And the hip-hop world didn't just mourn, it froze. Because Chris Lighty was a man behind the giants. If you listen to rap in the 90s and 2000s, you felt his fingerprints everywhere. Even if you didn't know his name, he wasn't on stage. He wasn't in music videos. He was in the boardrooms. He was the architect. Chris co-founded Violator Management and turned it into one of the most powerful forces in hip-hop. He guided careers like 50 Cent, Diddy, Busta Rhymes, Mariah Carey, Ja Rule, helping artists become moguls before mogul culture was even normal. He understood something early. Hip-hop wasn't just music. It was fashion, liquor, film, technology, business empires. Chris didn't just negotiate contracts. He built brands. He helped 50 Cent expand beyond albums into vitamin water deals and corporate partnerships that changed the financial blueprint for artists forever. From the outside, Chris Lighty looked untouchable, successful, respected, connected, a man who had figured it out. But success is a shadow. On the day he died, reports say he had been arguing with his ex-wife about money problems. Despite decades of influence, financial stress still followed him. Neighbors heard shouting, and then they heard a gunshot. When police arrived, Chris was gone. The medical examiner ruled it suicide, but the shock ran deeper than the death itself, because people couldn't understand it. How does a man with that much power, that much legacy, that much respect, feel that alone? His mother insisted for years. She didn't believe her son would take his own life. Fans questioned everything. But what couldn't be questioned was the weight his death exposed. Chris Lighty's passing forced conversations hip-hop had avoided. Mental health, depression, the pressure on black men to always appear strong, the expectation that success equals happiness. He was a pioneer, and he was suffering quietly. That's what made it devastating. Not just losing him, but realizing how invisible pain can be even at the top. Chris Lighty helped build an entire culture. Yet in the end, the culture didn't see his struggle in time. His story is a reminder you can have money, status, influence, and still be fighting a battle no one knows about. So check on your people, ask twice, and never assume strength means someone is okay. Because even legends behind the scenes can break in silence. And just like that, 15 legends. 15 stories that remind us how fragile life really is. Behind the fame, behind the lights, were real people fighting battles we never saw. Some were taken too soon. Some left after changing history forever. But every one of them left a legacy Hollywood can never erase. So now I want to ask you, which death shocked you the most? Drop it in the comments. And if these stories moved you, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us because their voices deserve to be remembered.